I led them with cords of kindness, with the bands of love. And I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them.
Shalom, shalom, folks. It's Brother Tindall from Something to Chew On. Coming in, going to do a brief video for the channel. I know a lot of people have asked me, let me do some housekeeping type stuff. I've had a lot of people ask me in the past couple of months if I was going, when I was going to start making videos again. For those who know and for those who don't know, I did a project. I finished it, I don't know, about four months ago, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, called the Read Along Bible. And what I did is I went through every book of the Bible and created a playlist for that book. Well, each playlist has one video per chapter of whatever book it relates to. For example, Genesis or Bereshit has 50 chapters, therefore the Bereshit playlist has 50 videos. And what it basically is it's an audio reading set to the Scripture 2009 version with the text on the screen scrolling up. So you can go to the playlists of whatever book, like I did all 66 books. So you can go to whatever playlist for whatever book and just click on the first video, which would be chapter 1 of that book, and it will play that one, and it will just automatically go to the next one. And it took me about 7, 8, 9 months. I forget exactly how long it took me to go through and do all this. Well, when I got done, I got finished, I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break. So I stepped back away from it, and you know how things go. Life happens, right? So I just kind of hadn't made any videos since then. And I've been having a lot of people ask me, when you going to start making videos again? And something come up the other day, and I've been led, you know what, let's make this into a video. And I'll say this. A lot of times, for those who don't know, on social media, most often Facebook, I'll respond to a comment. Somebody might make a comment or something. Instead of going on there and typing out a long response, which, because most of us know, communication, the majority of communication between two people is done through like body language and inflection and tone of our voice. And you don't get any of that typing out a message. Plus, making a video response or a video comment, if you will, is a little more personal. So I do that quite often on Facebook. Instead of having to type out, which I mean, I know how to type. It just, instead of having to type something out, I just turn the camera on and start talking. And I did this the other day, and I had a few people say, hey, one person, you need to make that into a video and put it on YouTube, on your YouTube channel. I had somebody else say, you need to make this shareable. It was very, very insightful tidbit, if you will. And, as soon as I made the video and posted it, I thought to myself, I need to turn this into a YouTube video. And then I got all these responses saying basically the same thing. And I'm like, well, there's your confirmation. Okay, now, with that said, let me preface this. I'm going to start off because of the name of this. You obviously see it's called Solomon, Wisdom, and the Shema. So, for those who don't understand or don't know what the Shema is, let's go to that first and let me explain that briefly and give you a basic understanding of what that is in relation to for those who don't know, and then we'll go from there, okay? So, let me bring this up. Hang on just a second. Okay, now I'm gonna read this straight out of the King James. My intention here is not to offend anybody, so if the way this is worded offends you, I'm sorry. Go study your Torah a little bit more, and you'll come to a better understanding. But let's just read this. I'm going to read it straight out of King James because most people, they know what the King James, They're familiar with the King James Version. Not that it's the best, not that I'm King James only, but most people are familiar with it. So let's read this. The Shema comes from Deuteronomy 6:4. Okay, and for those who don't know, this is probably the most quoted verse in the entire Bible in all of the world. Now, there may be people out there going, what? What about John 3:16? Well, you have to remember, the Shema itself is part of Jewish daily prayer. So you have Jews all over the world who recite this daily, multiple times. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. Now, with that said, let's actually go to the verse. Let's read it. Like I said, I'm going to read it straight out of King James. And this is going to give us some context as to where I'm going in this. All right, so let's bring this up. Deuteronomy 6:4 from the King James, read just like it says. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." Okay. Now, with that said, Shema, why is this called Shema? Because of this word right here. Here. In the Hebrew, the word is Shema. Now, give me a second and I'll pull this up. It's Strong's number H8085. We see right here above my mouse. Okay, now let me click. Okay, I've already got it brought up. Let's pull it up in the dictionary. See, we've got it right there. And I've got highlighted the part that I'm going to talk about. But we see right here. Here's how it would look in the Hebrew, Shema, and how you pronounce it. But this is Strong's. So this is how Strong's defines it. This is a primitive root. To hear intelligently, often with the implication of attention, obedience, etc. We got that? Now you can go on and read the rest of it, but basically, let's transition back. Basically, that English word here is the Hebrew word Shema. And like I said, to hear with the implication, to hear intelligently, meaning to understand what's being said to you, and with the implication of obey. And most often you will hear this word Shema defined as hear and obey. We understand that? Okay. Most of us know this verse. You may not have known all the little information I gave you, but either way. Now, we're going to go somewhere with this. But before I do, I have to give some context so it will make a little bit of sense. And I'm going to throw in a shameless plug for a Facebook group. My channel, I figure I can do that. Okay, let's see. I have a group. There's a group on Facebook. I'm not going to say I have. Somebody else created this group years ago. And they made me an admin, and there wasn't really much activity. Well, I noticed one day that the other person who was an admin had left the group. And now I was the sole admin of this group. And I thought about it, and I prayed about it. And I said, you know what? I bet you I can revive this group. And I started, this is what I was led to do. The name of the group, and I know some people, they don't like the name of this group, but hear out my explanation and it'll make sense. The name of the group is called Torah Trivia. And I have people often say, there's nothing trivia about the Torah. You're right, but I don't use the word trivia as in to trivialize the Torah, but as in asking questions about the Torah or the Tanakh, the Old Testament, the scriptures, sometimes in the New Testament. So what I decided to do in this group is every day, in the morning sometime, I post a question. And most often it's related to either the Torah specific or the Tanakh, meaning the Old Testament. And every now and then I will post a question relating to the Brit Hadashah, or the renewed covenant, new covenant, apostolic writing, however you want to relate it, the new covenant. You see what I'm saying? And I ask these simple, basic questions. And here's the thing. A lot of people miss the point of the group and or the questions in general. They miss the point of this. And I try to tell them this. And some people get it, and some people, they don't get it. The point of the group is not so much to get the correct answer. That's not the point of the group. The point, because, let me say this, because most of the questions I ask, they're not hard. They're not deep theological discussions that takes paragraphs and paragraphs to answer. Most often the answer can be found in one verse. One specific verse that will answer the question. Hence why in the post, when I put the question, I state specifically that I want the scripture address or the scripture reference, book, chapter, and verse from where you get your answer. Like I say, it's not so much about getting the correct answer as it is about making people go open their Bibles and find where the answer is. Because in doing that, they will read their Bibles. Does that make sense? And people miss that. I have people all the time, I ask them, they'll give the answer, and I'm like, well, where's that in the text? Oh, well, I don't want to win nothing. I don't want to win no prize. It's not about, but you're right, it's not. That's not the point. The point is to cause people to pick their Bibles up and read them. Because most of the questions, people already know the answers to. Now, where in the text it is, that's the tricky thing. That's why I asked for a specific book, chapter, and verse. So it shows in the text where the answer is. Back up your answer with scripture. Let that sink in for a moment. But do we see what I'm saying? And that's why I do that, because in showing where you get your answer, in a sense, shows that you've read it. And that's the point, to cause people to pick their Bibles up and read them, right? Now, I post, like I say, every morning I post one of these simple questions in the morning. In the afternoons, I post the daily Torah portion. Most of you know the Torah portion schedule, the Torah portion reading for a week. Well, I've got it broken down into daily portions, and I post them every day, and I put some picture with it that relates to the text, whether it's just somebody's artistic rendition of what's in the text, or whether it's like a visual teaching aid to go with the text. You see what I'm saying? And that's it. In the morning you get a question, in the evening you get the Torah portion. And that's it. And the point of the entire point of the group is to cause people to pick their Bibles up and read them. Make sense? Okay. Now with that said, I stress so often, and so, like I say, most of the questions are simple. They're simple, they're easy. Most people know the answer. But then there are some that some would say, well, that's a trick question. Well, no, it's not a trick question. You simply have to pay attention to the details. I stress that so often. Read the Bible for yourself, but read it for what it says. Not what you've been told it says, not what you think it says, most definitely not what your flesh wants to twist it into saying to justify your sinful life. Read it for what it says. That's the whole point. Read it. Okay? So a lot of times, well, I ain't going to say a lot, some of the times, I'll post a question and I'll either word it a certain way or I'll ask a specific question about something that I suspect that a lot of people will get wrong. Because what they have been taught, and hey, I base a lot of this off of what I've been taught in the past. You see what I'm saying? What I've been taught about what the text says, but then when I go back and I actually read the text, I'm like, well, that's what you taught is not what the text says. You see what I'm saying? So these questions, some of these questions are meant to draw that out, to point out the discrepancy between what we have been taught and or have come to believe compared to what the text actually says. And the other day was a perfect example of that. Okay? Now, like I said, shameless plug for my Facebook group, or for the Facebook group, a Facebook group. I'm going to put, for anybody who's interested, I'll put a link to the group in the description of this video below. So, if you want to go check it out and join, you're more than welcome. Okay. Let's see. Now, with all that said, now you got some context. Hey, always read in context. Now you got some context where this question and why this come up will make a little bit more sense. The question the other day was, let me pull this back up and make sure I read it correctly. Hang on just a second. Here it is. The question the other day, it was from June the 20th. Just so you know, if you're not familiar with the group, I put up there, welcome to Torah Trivia, June the 20th, or whatever the date is, I'll put up there, question of the day. And there's a little bit of information. And then at the bottom, I asked the question. Well, this is what the question said. It said, what did King Solomon ask for when Elohim appeared to him in a dream? Let me say that again. What did King Solomon ask for when Elohim appeared to him in a dream? Well, catch that. Now, I knew upon asking that somebody was going to answer and say, wisdom. Sounds good. Most of us were taught that. I was actually taught that. But years ago, when I sat down and I read the text and I realized something. I'm like, So, all right, now, let's go look at another verse. Let's look at some verses that would seem to back up this idea that Solomon asked for wisdom. Okay, let's go to, let me pull this up. Like I said, I'm going to use the King James today. All right. So let's go to 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 29. And this would seem to support the answer to that question as wisdom. What did Solomon ask for? Wisdom. That's what most people would say, right? Now I'm going to show you some verses that would seem to support that. Right here. 1 Kings 4:29 in the King James. It says, and Elohim gave Solomon wisdom. He gave him wisdom and understanding exceeding much and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. Verse 31. For he, meaning Solomon, was wiser than all men. Than Ethan the Ezrahite, than Heman, than Shachal, and Darda, and the sons of Mohal, and his fame was in all nations round about. Verse 29 says, Elohim gave Solomon wisdom. Verse 30 said, Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of Israel. And in verse 31 it says, for he, meaning Solomon, was wiser than all men. Now that would seem to say, well, I guess Solomon asked for wisdom. Okay. Now let's look at one more place. Let's back up one chapter. Give me just a second. Right here. Let's back up one chapter to 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 12. And this verse also would seem to support the fact that Solomon asked for wisdom. Okay, let's look at that. Like I say, 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 12 from the King James. Right here in the middle of the page. It says, behold, this would be the Most High speaking to Solomon. He said, behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any rise like unto thee. So we see those verses right there. They seem to say that Solomon asked for wisdom. Why? Because that's what he was given. That's what he received. And as I said, most often, I know for me, I can't speak for everybody else, but I can speak for myself. I was taught that Solomon asked for wisdom, and I believed that for years. Until I sat down one day and I started reading the text, and I read it, and I'm like, wait a minute. Solomon received wisdom, but the question said, what did he ask for? See, there's a difference between what you get and what you ask for. You don't always get what you ask for. Think about that. But that's for a different teaching. But let's back this up. Staying in 1 Kings chapter 3, we're going to read a swath of verses from verse 5 to verse 15. I'm going to just read all this in context so we see what it says. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to point out something. Very interesting tidbit. And I'm going to tie all this together. It'll make sense. Just stick with me. It'll make sense. Okay, we're going to start at verse 5. Like I said, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5 from the King James. I'm going to read it just what it says right through here. I'm going to go read down to verse 15. Give me just a second here. Okay, let's pull this back up. Like I said, keep in mind the question, the quote-unquote Torah trivia question for June the 20th was, what did Solomon ask for? It was, like I stated, not what he received, but what he asked for. See, I worded it like that on purpose to draw, hopefully to cause people's eyes to see something that perhaps they had never seen before. Okay, but let's read this. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5. It says, in Gibeon, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and Elohim said, ask what I shall give thee. And Solomon said, thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth, and in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with thee. Okay, let's stop right there. You know me, I got to stop and point out stuff. And this is a side note, a sidebar, a side tangent, if you will. It has nothing to do with the teaching on hand, but it is information that would be pertinent. Solomon said that his father David walked before the Most High in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart. Some of you will know the answer to what I'm going to ask. Some of you don't. And if you don't, go read the text and find out what this means. What does it mean to walk in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart? What does that mean? What does that look like? If you don't know the answer, go dig in the text and pray that the Most High will reveal this to you. What that actually means. It's not just poetical speech that sounds good. That actually means something. Truth, righteousness, uprightness, to walk in these things. Okay? Now, back to the point at hand. Let's read that verse again. Verse 6. And Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David my father great mercy, according to as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Verse 7. It says, And now, O Lord my God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh my Elohim, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. He's a child, and he doesn't know how to go out or come in. Verse 8, And thy servant is in the midst of thy people which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Verse 9, Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? Verse 10, And the speech pleased Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, that Solomon had asked this thing. Verse 11, And Elohim said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked of the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Verse 12, Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. Verse 13, And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among all kings like unto thee all thy days. Verse 14, And if thou wilt walk in my ways. What does that mean? What does that actually mean? It means something specifically. If you don't know, go dig in the text. Goes back up to the walking in truth, walking in righteousness, and walking in uprightness. Walking in his ways. What does all that refer to? Right? Okay, let's finish this out. And if thou wilt walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as my father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. Verse 15. And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and offered up burnt offerings, and offered peace offerings, and made a feast to all his servants. Okay, now, like I said, the question was, what did Solomon ask for? Not what did he receive? Okay, now if you had that in mind when you read through this, the answer jumped out at you. But let's dig a little bit deeper into it and see what Solomon actually asked for. Attention to details, according to what the text says. Like I said, I, and probably many of you, were taught Solomon asked for wisdom. But the text does not say that. Now, he was given wisdom, but he did not ask for wisdom specifically. Now, I'm going to show you. Let me make sure I'm going to pull up this right address. Verse 9. Same chapter, we just read it. 1 Kings 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 9. Now let's look at this. Now I'm going to pull this up. most of you, you know what the Strong's numbers are. And that's the translation. For those of you who watch my videos, you'll understand what you're going to see. But for those who don't, what this is this is the King James, and that next to it, you'll see out in the verse, within the verse itself, you'll have a word, and then you'll have a little purple number. A phrase or a word and then a purple number. Well, what it is, it shows you the English, and the purple number relates you back to the Strong's Concordance from whence the translation came, the Hebrew word itself. You see what I'm saying? And you can look up, like I did before with the Shema, and I showed you that word here is Shema, which means hear and obey, correct? And that was Strong's number H8085. Now, let's look to this verse and let's see what Solomon asked for according to the text. Not what he was given, but what he asked for. All right, let's pull this back up. If you see right here, below my mouse, let's read that verse. It says, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart. Right? You see right below my mouse where it says understanding? What's that Strong's number? It says H8085. In the Hebrew, it is that same word Shema that we read back in Deuteronomy 6:4. We catch that. I can hover my mouse over it. Oh, give it a second. Hover my mouse over it, see, and it pulls it up. So, according to the text, Solomon, according to the text, attention to details, Solomon did not ask for wisdom. He asked for Shema, a Shemaing heart, if you will. We'll make that Hebrew English. But an understanding heart. Basically, what it comes down to is he asked for a heart that would have the ability to hear and obey. But like the definition said, to hear intelligently, meaning to understand what he heard and then the ability to obey it. That's what Solomon asked for, to be able to hear and then to follow up with obedience. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. Now, I'll throw this out here. Let me pull one verse up. Now, I know people out there are going, but he disobeyed. His sin caused the split in the kingdom of Israel into the northern and the southern kingdoms, the northern house of Israel and the southern house of Judah, and all this. And I know a lot of people are thinking that, and you're getting your information from 1 Kings 11:4, and you would be correct. But let's actually read that verse and see what it actually says, okay? Because the passage we just read, let's read this one more time. Where was it at? Let me find it again. Right here. Let's go by. We're still in 1 Kings chapter 3, but let's read verse 7 one more time. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 7 with King James. It says, and now, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, my Elohim, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or to come in. Now, when he says child here, I don't think he means literally a little child, like a toddler or a teenager. He simply means a child, not so much physically as he does spiritually, perhaps. Do you see what I'm saying? Imagine this metaphorical language. We'll just leave it at that. But he was a child. People, like I said, people say, well, he sinned, right? But when he asked for this, and when he had this dream, and the Most High said, what you ask for, I'll give. And he asked for Shemaing heart, an understanding heart, a heart with the ability to hear and obey. He was a child. He had just come into his reign as king of the whole of Israel, meaning all 12 tribes, right? And people will go, But he sinned and did all this. You're right, he did. But let's actually go to that verse and see what it says. Now let me pull this up. 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 4. Now let's see what this says. It says, for when it came to pass when Solomon was old. See, there's a distinction. There he was a child, whether it meant physically, spiritually, or whatever, metaphorically. We'll put it that. But here it says when he was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other Elohim, other mighty ones, other gods. And his heart was not perfect with Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, his Elohim, as was the heart of his father. We see that? Okay. His great sin of allowing his heart to be led away. Basically, he disobeyed. The Most High said, don't marry foreign wives because it's going to turn your heart away. Solomon, in his old age, disobeyed and married foreign wives. And what happened? His heart was led away, and he built high places east of the city of Jerusalem. And that sin is what led to the split of the whole kingdom of Israel into the northern and southern kingdoms. The house of Israel in the north and the house of Judah in the south. Okay, you can read 1 Kings 11 is one place that's mentioned. You see what I'm saying? Okay, now, but with that said, that's a kind of a side note. Let me pull up another verse, and I'm going to show you something that is very interesting. If we go to Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 6. Okay? Now remember, Solomon, I ain't going to say we all, I and many of us were probably taught Solomon asked for wisdom. The text says he asked for a heart that could hear and obey. Specifically. Okay? But let's ask ourselves, what is wisdom? Now, wisdom, that word wisdom is used many different ways in the text. Okay? But one of the places where we can draw a definition from the context of the text itself, of the Torah specifically, is Deuteronomy 4:6. And when we read it with a little bit of discernment, we see what wisdom is. Okay? Now, let's go back and let's read that. Right here in the middle of the page, Deuteronomy 4:6, it says, keep. Okay, let's stop right there. For those who have never heard me talk about that word, keep. Let's pull this up in the Strong's H8104. Shamar. It is related to that word Shema, hear and obey. But this is keep. Okay? If we notice down there, look at the definition. This is a primitive root, properly to hedge about as with horns. That is, guard, generally to protect. Okay? This is a side tangent. For those who do not know this, in our modern English Bibles, the King James, and many of the modern, the more modern, ESV, New American Standard, all those Bibles, this word is translated as keep. And it gives the implication of a strict outward obedience. But that is not what this word means. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying we are not to obey. I'm simply saying this word does not mean obey. It means guard. There is a distinction. There is a subtle difference in keep and guard. Okay? But most people never dig into the Hebrew of the text to understand these things. So when they read this, they come away from it having a poor understanding of what's actually being said. Let's read the verse again, and I'll explain fully what I'm talking about. Let's put it back in the straight King James without all the purple numbers. Okay. Right in the middle of the page. It says, keep, therefore, and do them. Now, what is this talking about? Back up one verse. It says, behold, this is the Most High. It's what Most High has told Moses, and then what Moses is telling the people. Okay? Deuteronomy 4:5 from the King James. Behold, I, Moses, have taught you statutes and judgments, even as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, my Elohim, commanded me, that you should do so in the land whither you go to possess. Okay, now in verse 6 it says, keep therefore and do them. Do what? Statutes and judgments. Okay, those terms are referring specifically to things, but in general, it's referring to what most would know as the law of God, the Torah, the instructions of the Most High. That's what it's talking about. Okay, Deuteronomy 4:6. Keep therefore and do them. Do the law of God. Obey the law of God. That's Bible code. Do is Bible code for obey. We get that. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. What this verse is saying, to keep the law of God. Like I said, that word keep does not mean a strict outward obedience. But like I said, I'm not saying we are not to obey. I'm saying that's not what that word means. It means to guard, as in basically put, hold the instructions of the Most High in the correct perspective in our life. Hold them in the right place in our heart. Meaning, simply put, I understand I am supposed to obey the instructions of God, the law of God, the Torah. I understand I'm supposed to obey this. Now, will I always do it perfectly? Most likely not. But praise Yah for His grace and His mercy, because within the law itself, He has built in a way for us to be reconciled and forgiven for when we transgress the law. Sacrifices. I'll leave it at that. But the word keep means to guard, to understand I'm supposed to obey this. Not that I'm going to do it perfectly. And the fact that I'm not going to do it perfectly is not a reason to quit. We strive, be perfect because I am perfect. We strive for perfection. We strive for perfect obedience, even though we may not ever attain it in this life. But in the life to come, it will be written on our heart. And sin will then be completely taken away from us. And we won't be able to sin. We will obey it. You see what I'm saying? Keep. Not keep. Guard. And with proper placing the law in proper perspective, the natural outflow is to keep, is to obey. But this word does not mean keep. It means to guard. We guard it, we will keep it. Guard. It's about our perspective. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, with all that said, we notice what else the verse said. Let's pull it back up one more time. I'm almost done. It says, guard, therefore, and do them. Do what? Obey the commandments, the statutes, the judgments, the law, the Torah. Obey it. Do it. For this is your wisdom. Like I said, with a little bit of discernment, we see that wisdom is actually obeying. We get that? Okay. Now, with all this said, let me close it with this. The question said, what did Solomon ask for? And most, like me, would say, wisdom. No, he didn't ask for wisdom. He asked for a heart to hear and obey. And in obeying, in understanding and obeying, that is wisdom. So he asked for wisdom indirectly, not directly. He asked for the step that it takes to actually get to the wisdom. He asked for understanding to hear and the ability to obey, which is the wisdom. Does that make sense? Now, like I said, back in 1 Kings 4, where he says that he was wiser than all men. No matter if he sinned in his later life, he was still considered the wisest man. Until Messiah, Yeshua, walked on the earth. Solomon was the wisest man. Now, with that said, let's look to something Solomon wrote. And it's probably, on the surface, we've read it 1,000 times. But when you know you got some context, and I just gave you a whole bunch of context, and you read it again, think about it. It's a very simple statement, but yet it is very profound. And in my opinion, this could be the wisest thing Solomon ever said. If it's not the wisest thing it said, it's most definitely in the top 10 list. But let's go to it. Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. It says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear Elohim and guard his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. I'll leave it at that. And I'll say, shalom and blessings. And if it hadn't reached you yet, and when it comes, Shabbat Shalom. And I'll end this video like I end all my videos. Don't just read this thing, but chew on it. Shalom, shalom, folks.